You know, I've worked at Highgrove for nearly 31 years now. Started as an assistant groundskeeper when I was barely 22, fresh out of the army, still carrying that stiff back and that habit of calling everyone sir. My father worked the same gardens before me. So did his uncle. We're a family that knows soil. We know hedges. We know which way the wind comes off the Cotswolds in October. But I'll tell you something honest. In all my years tending the grounds where royals walk, I've never seen anything quite like what happened that Saturday in late June. Not the wedding parties, not the garden tour, not even the time a fox got into the Rose Pavilion and dragged off Camilla's sun hat. What I saw that afternoon was two small boys, two pieces of heavy canvas, and a quiet kind of magic that grown men spend their whole lives trying to find again. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. It was a Saturday. I remember because we had the weekend crew on, which meant only 3 of us were out near the kitchen garden. Eddie, who's been my second since 2008, young Marcus, who'd only joined the previous spring, and me. The weather was the sort of perfect June weather that English people complain about because we don't trust it. Clear blue sky, a breeze coming through the lime walk, bees doing their bee work in the lavender beds. I just finished checking the irrigation lines along the south wall when I heard them. 2 voices, boys' voices, carrying across the lawn the way kids' voices do, that particular brightness that cuts through everything else. You're holding it wrong, George. Dad said you have to keep it taut. I am keeping it taut. You're the one who keeps letting your side drop. I looked up. There they were, walking out of the cedar archway near the rose garden, dragging what looked like a great heap of cream-colored canvas between them. The older boy, George, had a coil of rope slung over his shoulder like a proper sailor. The younger one, Louis, was carrying a wooden mallet that was nearly half his height. He was holding it with both hands the way you'd hold a sword. Behind them, walking at that deliberately slow pace adults use when they're letting children believe they're doing something on their own, came their father. Now I want to be careful here. I'm not going to pretend I know the man personally. I don't. In all the years I've worked these grounds, I've exchanged perhaps 50 words with him directly. He's polite, always remembers names, has that quiet way about him that I think comes from growing up watched. But that afternoon, he wasn't watching as a future king. He was watching as a dad. There's a difference. You see it in the shoulders. You see it in how the hands hang loose at the sides instead of folded behind the back. He had a clipboard. I noticed that. A wooden clipboard with a pencil tied to it by a bit of garden twine. And he was smiling in a way that suggested he was trying very hard not to laugh. I should explain something about the canvas they were dragging. It wasn't modern camping kit. None of that lightweight nylon you get at the big shops now. This was proper old gear, heavy cotton canvas, the kind that smells like wax and rope when you unfold it. Brass eyelets along the edges, wooden pegs in a separate canvas roll. The poles were ash hand-cut, the sort you used to see in army surplus shops in the 70s. I learned later that the kit had belonged to their great-grandfather, Prince Philip. He'd kept it from his outward-bound days, apparently, or perhaps from one of the expeditions he led in his younger years. Either way, the canvas had been packed away in a storeroom at Sandringham for decades. Someone had brought it down to Highgrove specifically for that afternoon. That's the bit that got me when I thought about it later. 2 boys, one dead great-grandfather's tent, a summer afternoon. You don't see that often anymore. They set up in the open lawn just past the cedar. There's a flat bit of grass there, maybe 40 feet square, that we keep cut short for garden parties. The grandfather had used it for his sketching once, I'm told. Stood out there with his easel for hours. The boys dropped their canvas in a great heap. Right then, I heard their father say, he'd come to a stop about 10 paces back. You both know the rules. George nodded. He was wearing one of those navy jumpers with the sleeves pushed up, and a pair of khaki shorts that looked like they'd belonged to someone older. His knees were already grass-stained. "Tell me the rules, Lou." The younger one straightened up. He had this serious look on his small face, like he was about to recite something in school assembly. "No grown-ups helping," he said. "Just telling, no touching the canvas." "Good, what else?" "Proper knots, not the cheating ones." I saw their father bite his lip. "Define cheating knot, please." Louis frowned. "When you just wrap it round and tuck it in." "That's right, anything else?" George piped up. "Whoever finishes first wins, but it has to actually stand up. If it falls down before tea, you lose even if you finished first." "Excellent." Then their father did something I'll remember for a long time. He didn't pull out a fancy timer. He didn't make a speech. He just sat down, cross-legged, on the grass, clipboard balanced on one knee, like any dad anywhere. "Begin when you're ready." I should have gone back to my irrigation lines. Honestly, I had a list of tasks as long as my arm, and Eddie was somewhere over near the kitchen garden waiting for me to bring him the new hose attachments. But I didn't move. I crouched down by the stone wall, pretending to inspect the moss on the bottom course, and I watched. George went straight for the canvas. He started unfolding it carefully, the way you'd unfold an old map, with that respect children sometimes have for things older than themselves. He was muttering to himself, I think, going through some kind of mental list. Louis went for the poles. This is where I nearly laughed out loud. The ash poles were nearly as tall as he was, maybe taller. He pulled the first one out of the bundle and immediately overbalanced, the pole tipping forward like a felled tree. He stumbled 3 steps trying to catch it, then caught it, then stood there with this enormous wooden pole in his hands looking immensely pleased with himself. "I've got it," he shouted. "Don't drop it on your foot, Lou." "I won't." He immediately dropped it. Not on his foot, thank God, just on the grass. He picked it up again, set it carefully on the ground, picked up another one. George had the canvas spread out now in a rough rectangle. He was on his hands and knees, smoothing it flat, finding the corners. I could see him working out which way was up. The tent was the old ridge style, what we used to call an A-frame when I was a boy. 2 upright poles, a horizontal ridge pole. Then the canvas draped over and pegged out at the sides. It's not actually that complicated, if you know what you're doing. The trick is the knots. I want to tell you about the knots, because they matter to this story. You see, you can't just tie a tent down with any old knot. You need knots that will hold under tension but release when you want them to. You need knots that won't slip when the wind picks up. There's a particular knot called the taut line hitch that's used for guy ropes. It lets you adjust the tension by sliding it up and down. There's the clove hitch for securing the ridge pole. There's the bowline for the corner loops. These aren't difficult knots, but they're not easy either. They take practice. They take the kind of patience that small boys aren't famous for. I learned them in the Army. Spent half my second year tying and untying ropes in the rain until I could do it blindfolded. George, I realized after about 10 minutes, knew them too. I watched him kneel by the first peg point. He had the corner of the canvas in one hand and a length of brown rope in the other. He looped it once, twice, pulled it through. His small fingers were working with the kind of careful concentration you usually only see in surgeons or watchmakers. It was a proper bowline. I nearly fell off my heels. A 10-year-old, sitting on the grass, tying a perfect bowline without looking up. Louis, meanwhile, was having a different sort of afternoon. He'd managed to get one of the upright poles roughly vertical by leaning it against the canvas heap. He was now trying to push the second pole into the ground at what he clearly believed was the correct angle. The pole was longer than he was. It kept tipping. He kept catching it, tipping, catching. He had his tongue stuck out the corner of his mouth. "George," he said. "What? How do you make it stand up?" "You don't push it into the ground, Lou. You stake the ridge." What's the ridge? The top bit, the bit that goes across. Louis looked at his pole, he looked at the canvas, he looked at his pole again. I don't have a top bit. Yes, you do. It's in the bundle, the longer one. Louis dropped the pole he was holding. It fell into the canvas heap with a soft thud. He went to the bundle. He pulled out another pole, looked at it, pulled out another, looked at that one too. They're all the same. No, they're not. Yes, they are. Lou, they're not. The ridge is longer. Their father, sitting cross-legged in the grass, said nothing. He was making notes on his clipboard, trying very hard, I could see, to keep a straight face. The thing about watching children try to do something difficult is that you want to help them. Every fiber of your adult body wants to lean in and take the rope and show them. It's almost physical, that urge, like an itch. But you can't. Because if you do, you take something away from them. I learned that with my own kids years ago. My daughter was trying to tie her shoes, must have been about 5 years old. She was sitting on the front step crying because the loops kept slipping out. I was about to kneel down and do it for her. My wife stopped me, put her hand on my arm, said, "Let her get there." It took my daughter 23 minutes to tie that shoe. I know because I timed it. When she finally did it, when the bow held, she looked up at me with this expression I'll carry to my grave. Like she just split the atom. That was what their father was doing on the lawn that afternoon, sitting on his hands, letting them get there. About 15 minutes in, George had his first corner properly staked. He used the wooden mallet that Louis had abandoned. Tap, 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 drove the peg in at a clean angle the way you're meant to, with the peg leaning away from the canvas so the tension would hold. He stood up, surveyed his work, wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. It was actually getting hot now. The sun was up over the high cedars and the lawn was catching the full of it. "You've got grass on your face, George," called his father. "I know. You've got rather a lot of grass on your face." "I'm concentrating, Papa." That got me, Papa, such a small word, but it sat in the air for a moment like it meant something. George went back to his second corner. Louis was struggling. He'd managed to get 2 poles upright by leaning them against each other. The canvas was draped over them in a way that looked, if I'm being generous, like a collapsed parachute. He was now trying to drag the bottom edge out to where he thought the corner should go. The canvas was heavy, properly heavy. The old waxed cotton can weigh 40 pounds when it's fully spread. "Need help with that, Lou?" his brother called. "No. You only have to ask. I don't need help." I should mention something about Louis here. From what I've seen over the years, the boy has fire in him. I don't know him personally, of course, but I've seen him in passing, running ahead of his parents through the gardens, climbing the low walls when he thinks no one is watching. He's the kind of small boy who wants to do things himself, who pushes back when you try to lift him into the car, who refuses to wear the coat even when it's raining. You see kids like that, and you know 2 things. 1, they'll be exhausting until they're about 30. 2, they'll probably do something remarkable with their lives. George had 3 corners pegged. Louis had managed to wrap himself in canvas. I don't mean a little bit. I mean fully. He'd been trying to drag a corner out, and somehow the whole sheet had folded over him, and he was now standing in the middle of the lawn with a great cream-colored shroud over his head, only his small Wellingtons visible at the bottom. "Lou," called his father, the laughter only just held in. "I'm fine. You can't see, can you?" "I can see a bit." "Through the canvas." "Through a hole. There's a hole here. I think it's a peg hole." "There would be holes in it, yes." George was watching this. He'd stopped working on his last corner. He was holding the mallet in one hand and looking over at his little brother, who was now slowly turning in a circle inside the canvas like a small ghost, trying to find its way home. I saw something pass across George's face. I want to describe this carefully, because I think it's the heart of what happened that afternoon. He could have laughed. He was 10. His little brother was wrapped in a tent. It would have been the most natural thing in the world to laugh, to point, to take the easy joke. He didn't. He set down the mallet. He walked across the lawn. He stopped about 2 feet from the canvas mound that was his brother. "Lou, stand still." "Why?" "Just stand still, stop turning." Louis stopped. George reached up. He found the top of the canvas, where Louis's head was making a little point in the fabric, and he lifted it, slowly, carefully, like you'd lift a sheet off a sleeping cat. Louis emerged. His hair was standing on end. There was a piece of dried leaf stuck to his cheek. The brothers looked at each other. "Thanks," said Louis. George shrugged. "You better hurry up, I'm nearly finished." Then he walked back to his tent. I want to stop here, because something happened in that small moment that I've thought about a lot since. There was no rule that said George had to help. The rules they'd set out at the start were clear. No grown-ups helping. Whoever finishes first wins. He could have stood there with his mallet and let his brother flounder. He'd have won easily. But he helped anyway. Then he walked away, and he didn't say anything to his father about it. He didn't look over for approval. He didn't make a thing of it. He just helped his brother out of a tent, then went back to his own work. That's the sort of thing you can't teach a child. You can model it. You can hope they pick it up. But in the end, they either do it or they don't. George did it. I made a mental note to tell my wife about it that evening, even though I wasn't supposed to talk about anything I saw on the job. I knew I'd tell her anyway. Some things you can't keep in. Right. So, George went back to his fourth corner. Louis, freed from his canvas prison, looked at his pile of poles and his crumpled canvas with a face that suggested he was very close to having what my mother used to call a moment. His lower lip was doing that thing children's lower lips do. He didn't cry, though. He sat down in the grass next to his canvas, cross-legged, and he started thinking. I could see his small face working it out, his eyes going from one pole to the other, from one peg to the canvas, from the canvas to where his brother was tying off his last guy line. You could almost see the gears turning behind those eyes. Then, very quietly, he said something I didn't quite catch. His father leaned forward on his clipboard. "What was that, Lou?" I said, "I'm going to start again." "From scratch?" "Yes." "You don't think you can rescue what you've got there?" Louis shook his head. "No, it's all wrong. I have to start again." His father nodded slowly. "All right, off you go." This is when I should have walked away. I had work to do. I had Eddie waiting. I had a list. The boy's father glanced over at me at one point. He must have known I was watching and gave me a small nod. Not unfriendly, just acknowledging, the sort of nod that says, "I see you and it's fine." I nodded back. Then I went and pretended to check the moss again. What I really wanted to see was whether the youngest one could come back from this. It's easy to root for the older brother in these situations. He's clearly competent. He's clearly going to win. He's going to put up his neat little ridge tent with its proper bowlines and its taut line hitches, and he's going to stand back with his small hands on his hips and look pleased. But the younger one was the story. Louis started again, this time slower. He unrolled the canvas flat, pressed it down with his small hands until it was smooth. Then he stood up and walked around it, looking at it from every angle, like a builder surveying a foundation. He picked up one pole, the shortest one. He looked at it, set it down. He picked up another, longer, looked at it, set it down. He picked up the third, longest, the ridge pole. That one, I heard him whisper to himself. He laid it down along the center of the canvas, lengthways like a spine. Then he picked up the two shorter poles. He set them at the ends of the ridge pole, like an A-frame, like a tent should look. Then he stood back. He looked at his father. His father said nothing, just made a small mark on his clipboard. Louis went to the bag of pegs, picked one out, picked up the mallet, walked to the first corner of the canvas, held the peg against the brass eyelet, lifted the mallet with both hands, and brought it down on his thumb. He didn't scream. That was the surprising bit. A small boy hits his thumb with a wooden mallet, you expect a scream. You expect tears. You expect the whole performance. Louis just stopped, frozen for a moment. Then he sat down very slowly. He put the mallet aside. He looked at his thumb. His father got up. I want to say this carefully because I think it matters. His father didn't run over. He didn't make a fuss. He walked across the grass at a normal pace and crouched down next to his son. "Show me, Lou." Louis held out his thumb. "Bit purple, isn't it?" "It hurts." "I expect it does. Did you hit it dead on?" "Sort of off to the side." "Good, off to the side is better. Squeeze it for me. Tight as you can, like a hug." Louis squeezed his thumb with his other hand. "Now count to 20. Louis started counting. His voice was a bit shaky at first. By the time he got to 10, it was steady. By 20, he was almost his normal self again. "How's it feel?" "Still hurts, but less." "That's the thumb hug. Old trick. Your grandfather taught it to me. Want to keep going?" Louis nodded. His father got up, walked back to his clipboard, sat down. Across the lawn, I saw George had stopped working. He was watching this whole thing, his face very still. Then he gave a small, almost invisible nod, like he was approving of his brother's bravery, and he went back to his last guy rope. I'll tell you something that stuck with me from that moment. There's a particular kind of love that doesn't fuss. It doesn't rush in. It doesn't make the small thing into a big thing. It just sits quietly beside the hurt person and helps them through. It's the hardest kind of love to give a child, I think, because every instinct says scoop them up, make it better, fix it. But sometimes children need to know they can survive the small pains, the hit thumb, the collapsed tent, the losing. If you fix everything for them, they grow up thinking the world is unbearable when something goes wrong. That father, sitting on his clipboard, watching his small son shake out a sore thumb and pick up his mallet again, he was teaching something more important than any tent-building skill. He was teaching the boy he could keep going. Louis went back to his peg. He held the mallet differently this time, choked up on the handle, tapped the peg gently, tap, tap, tap. Then a harder strike. The peg went in another inch. Tap, tap, another inch. Tap, tap, tap. Then a proper firm blow. The peg was in. He stood up, wiped his nose with the back of his hand, looked at his work. Then he did something I won't forget. He looked across at his brother. George was tying off his final rope. His tent was up, properly up, standing there on the grass like a soldier at attention, taut and trim and exactly the way the old army manuals show it. He'd done a magnificent job, honestly. 4 perfect corners, a clean ridge. The canvas pulled tight without a single wrinkle. Louis looked at it. Then he looked at his own crumpled mess, the one upright peg. The canvas still bunched in the middle, the poles lying flat. I thought, here it comes, now he'll cry. He didn't. He turned back to his canvas. He picked up another peg, he picked up the mallet, he went to the next corner. And he kept going. That's where I have to stop this part of the story. Because what happened next deserves its own breath. What happened next was the part that made Eddie come over from the kitchen garden to see what I was looking at. What made Marcus, the young one, set down his shears and just stand there watching? What made the boy's father set down his clipboard, finally, and just sit on the grass with his hands in his lap? It was the wind that did it. The wind that came off the cedars about an hour into the afternoon, just as it looked like everything had been decided. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. I always do that. Let me catch my breath. The next part, I'll tell you what the wind did.